A lot's been going on since the last time we spoke. First and foremost, football is back. Go Birds. Second, the Fed looks set to cut rates this month, and this is something we've been waiting for all year, so we'll definitely talk about that a little bit later. But at the same time, jobs don't seem to be doing too great this year. Some revised numbers came out a couple days ago, and it looks like things might be a little bit worse than we thought they were, which is part of the reason why we are most definitely going to be seeing rate cuts this month. And on the other side, because things don't look too good with the job market, mortgage rates have dropped. And of course, when mortgage rates go down, something that we've also talked about earlier this year, buyer demand has shot back up. Not only buyer demand, but people who got it at a higher rate, maybe last year or the year before that, they're starting to refinance. And those mortgage applications are going up through the roof. So we're going to go over those things that have been going on for the past couple of weeks since the last time we spoke, dive into it a little bit, get you caught up on what's going on in the news, and then end off with my content rec of the week because, of course, I've been checking out some new shows and I want to bring something to you guys in case there's something that you want to watch in your spare time when you're not catching the game. So let's get into it. And we'll be back in 3, 2, 1, we gone. Welcome back, families, to another episode of the First Sip Podcast. I'm your host, Dekimbe Smith, and this week, as I sip on my ginger tea, yes, we are back to ginger tea today. This is a little bit later of a recording in the day, so no coffee, not even decaf, had that earlier in the day. But before we dive into the news, I wanted to get you guys caught up on what's been going on in the past couple of weeks. I know it's been a little while since the last episode. I mean, it was summertime, right? So it was a little bit of traveling. I don't even think I told you guys, I went down to Guyana, I went to go see my family. It was my dad's 60th birthday. Dad, I know you're probably watching this, so we were down there. It was a great time getting to see everybody, hanging out, catching up with family, seeing different locations, just having a good time. And more than anything else, getting just kick back and relax, right? And talking about relaxing, a couple of weeks after that, went and met up with the boys, met up with the family, and everybody was together. I think I talked about this before. We do an annual summit, where we all get together, kind of kick back, spend some time catching up with what's going on with everybody. And it's always a good time. This time everybody brought, if they had families, wives, they all came. And it was a good time, something I'm definitely looking forward to next year and something that we can keep building on, year after year and seeing how these things can keep growing, because, one thing we talk about here too is growing a community. And one thing I'm really happy to say, I have outside of, this digital space that we are building here is a community, that I can go to and, connect with in times like that, so when summer times come by, we got some stuff to do, places to go, people to see. So that's what I've been up to, but that's not why you're here, right? You're probably here. Well, you might be here to know what's going on with me. So if you are, I appreciate it. But you're probably here, like I said, to talk more about the news that I was going over in the beginning. So let's go ahead and dive into it. So, like I started off saying, football is back and the Eagles started off with their first win of the season. I'm just kidding. That's not what we're going to start with. We're starting off with the Fed rate cut that is pretty much a lock for this month. Now, if you're watching this later on in the year, this is September 2025, and we are pretty much right moving into the final quarter of the year, and we have been waiting to see some sort of relief when it comes to mortgage rates and waiting to see what Jerome Powell was when he was going to make his decision to go ahead and cut these rates, right? I know I've talked about things before, like his decision to hold off because he wanted to see what was happening with tariffs and whether or not they were going to be super inflationary and if it was really going to mess up the economy overall, or if, these things were going to be put in place and if it wasn't going to have any real effect on the producers, people who have to import items into the country. Now, recently, some information did come out, for the month of August that showed the producers and, the importers into this country really aren't seeing too much of a increase of how much they're having to pay. Now, that might be because they've had stockpiles coming in earlier in the year, but things don't look too crazy right now on the tariff side, so we'll still have to wait and see if anything ticks up throughout the end of the year. But, like I've said before, we have to kind of just wait and see, month after month and wait for these reports to come out, pretty much like the Fed is doing here, and then going off of that information. But on the other side of that, right, something that's kind of worrying him, which is why we're pretty much set to see a rate cut this month, is the jobs reports. Right now, when you look at these numbers that have been coming out month after month after month, job creation isn't going in the direction that they expected it to. We're expecting a lot more job growth than we've been seeing this year. And numbers just came out the other day too from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, where they had a revised number that showed that I think back in March, when they looked at it for the year, right, we had created 900,000 less jobs than we had originally thought. Now, how you miscount 900,000 jobs, I don't know, right? I haven't dived that far into it yet. I'm gonna get there, but that is something where, and this isn't the first time this happened, right? These revisions come out all the time, and depending on who you're talking to, sometimes people will say this happens because, of politics. Maybe people don't want things to look bad and say, you know what, let's wait a couple months before we release the real revised numbers, or before we do any sort of revision and double check to see what's going on. Because if we release that information right now, it may not be too good for the economy, right? So you might see some things get revised, changed around, kind of like what happened in the last administration, right? When, Biden first came in and we were really paying attention to inflation and if things were going to be, really just blowing up through the roof. And they started saying, oh no, inflation's transitory, right? Like these things aren't going to last. It's, it will be fine. Don't worry about it. Well, wrong. And if you're, like I said, if you're looking, they were wrong, right? And not only was inflation going through the roof, but if you were to ask me, if you were to ask a few other people, we've been in a recession for quite a long time. And that is a word that you still haven't seen come across most news outlets, because nobody wants to say we're in a real recession, right? Nobody wants to say things are slowing down. When you look at consumer spending, when you look at when you look at buyer activity throughout the markets, things are slowing down, right? When you talk to people, they all say it. But when you look at news, when you look at the headlines, sometimes you're not going to be seeing that information. So that's something, like I said, when you're paying attention and saying, okay, like what's going on with these numbers? Why are these things coming out, in different ways than we were originally told? There's a lot that goes on behind it, right? Which is another reason why when you're looking at the Fed's decision and what they're planning on doing, they take so long and kind of drag their feet, which upsets some people too, right? Because you would hope that you would wish they would make a decision faster and then kind of, go with whatever happens after that. But like I said, they wait and see, okay, what do these numbers look like over time? Is there any sort of revision? Is there any sort of long-term impact that's going to really mess with anything before we go ahead and jump and make a decision? So with this new information that is coming out showing that jobs really aren't in the place that they thought they were, this is sparking that move for Jerome Powell to go ahead and say, you know what? This looks like the time for us to go ahead and make a cut. And not only Powell, right, but the other central bankers that are involved in the decision making, they're coming together and saying, well, I don't know what other information we need, because they do have a duty to make sure that the job market and job growth is also stable, as well as making sure that inflation is going in the right direction, right? So they have to make sure these two things are both going in a positive direction. So they can't just look at one, like we were talking about before with tariffs and inflation, and not focus on jobs. So when they're sitting back and looking at these things, they're saying, oh, okay, there's that signal that we've been waiting for, and saying, okay, this is the thing that we need to go ahead and start making those cuts. Now, how much of a cut are we expected to see this month? Some people are saying we might see up to either 50 basis points or a 25%. So a quarter or a 0.5%, right? Now, other people are saying that not only will we maybe see, let's say we start off with a 0.25% this month, right? Most people are definitely banking on another cut before the end of the year. And if not 2, 3 cuts. So like I said, if you're somebody who's been listening, you've been tuning in, you've been talking to your friends about your plans of maybe buying or refinancing, or just looking at other things too, because it doesn't only apply to real estate, right? This is something that you might go ahead and say, okay, let me look at my game plan again, because if I'm factoring in some cuts coming into the end of the year, do I need to go ahead and make a move, right? But like I said, talking about it, it's not all, rainbows and butterflies, because some other people are really hurting right now, right? The job market is not as strong as it was years ago, and people are having a hard time finding a job, right? So as great as it is to see this news coming in, about rate cuts, I think sometimes we have to, not even sometimes, I think all the time, we have to consider the people, the people on the other side too, where it's like, okay, as these, as this good news is coming in, what's going to happen to the people who can't really benefit from it at this time because of the other side of the economy that's going down, right? The things that, the people who definitely have the dreams of buying their home, buying a new car, and, right when rates might be coming down, they're struggling to find solid work for them to even be able to afford these things, right? To be able to make a strong enough income to go ahead and do that. So when I'm looking at that, right, that's where I'm looking at both of these things and saying, okay, Like you said, you got to take the good with the bad, but know what's going on both sides and knowing where everything really stands on this economic table that we're looking at. And of course, the moment rates ticked lower, we saw that spike in buyer demand and refinance demand. Now, this is something, like I said, I've talked about this on a couple episodes ago, where I said, listen, as soon as rates start coming back down to the low sixes, the high fives, we are going to see buyer demand go up through the roof. Because I know I was just talking about some people hurting in the jobs area, but at the same time, there's a lot of people who have been saving their money and stacking their money and just saying, you know what, once that time comes, I'm hitting the runway. It's time for us to go. We're securing that house. I've been looking at a couple places, and it's time for us to go ahead and get what we've been waiting for. And same thing with the people, like I said, who locked in at a higher rate. Maybe they saw the house of their dreams or something that they could work with and said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and lock this in. I'm not worried about the rate right now, but as long as I can secure this home, I can refinance once rates come back down. And what are we expecting in the next coming weeks? Rates to come down. And not only are we expecting that in the next couple of weeks, but we saw the biggest drop of the year just, what was it, last week? Yeah, right around, let's say like September 5th, right? We saw the biggest drop of the year. And right around the time of this recording, right between like a 6.27, 6.29% on the interest rate, right? And that's a significant drop from where we were earlier in the year, right around the 6.8s, 6.7s. So this is something, like I said, I definitely want to make sure you guys are aware of what's going on, spread the information with people who might be interested, right? So they know, like, okay, these things are coming up in the next couple of weeks. I know we talked about, that stuff the other day. Go ahead and pay attention to this so you can go ahead and make the right move and not wait too late, right? And just keep waiting and waiting, because on the other side of that, and we're not going to really dive into this today, but home prices are still going up, right? So yes, this might be a good time for buyers to get back in, but buyers are getting back in with lower rates, not lower home prices, right? So at that time too, so when you're looking at that, you got to consider and say, okay, how long do I continue to wait? If this rate isn't good enough for me, then what's my striking point? Where am I really looking to get into it at? Because if I keep waiting another 6 months, another year, are those home prices going to go up another 5%, another 7%? And depending on where you live, that can be a significant amount of money. So, just different things to consider and different things to think about. But like I said, I'm going to keep bringing you guys the news week over week, keep breaking these things down for you so you'll know exactly what's going on, when the rates get cut, what are we looking at that time, and what you should be doing. I'm going to bring my lender back on in the next couple of weeks so we can get an update on how you should finish out the year. If you are planning on doing some stuff, some tips that you can go ahead and, consider, like I said, when you're building out your plan. But before we end the episode, I'm getting back to the content rec of the week, right? So you guys know I love to check out, different shows, movies, like to read a lot of different books, as you can probably see back here. So there's different things I've been diving into throughout the summer. But one of the first ones I wanted to bring you, because I finished a series. Yes, I said the series. This was like a summer project for me. Like, how we used to have summer reading when we were kids. Yeah, well, I have summer shows. And the one that I checked out was Bosch. And if you haven't seen this is actually, it comes from a book series from Michael Connelly. And it's about a detective who really has an interesting past, right? When you talk about like mother-son issues, PTSD from the army, issues with his ex-wife, a lot bottled up. And sometimes he tends to bring that to work, right? But not only does he bring that to work, he has to deal with work, right? And as a detective in LA, you see some things. And Bosch is a guy who will not always agree with the way justice plays out, when things are going on. Take for instance, he brings somebody in, the evidence is clear as day, and, they're going through the trial and the person ends up walking because of some nonsense claim or something they say they can't make stick. So he sits back and says, okay, what do I do? And sometimes you got to take things into your own hands. And these are the kind of detective shows I love. I'm all about these things, Law and Order, Chicago PD, love those shows, right? So if you're into that kind of stuff, definitely check this one out. It was definitely enjoyable. Each season builds around its own story. Like I said, it comes from the book series, so it's around its own story, right, with its own, case that he has to go after. And it's just great to see like how the case keeps building, through the episodes and how things keep going on, right? So it's good, like nice passive TV, something that's not too dramatic, like too crazy, that's like things are blowing up or people dying left and right all the time. But it definitely has a good edge to it, but a great story behind it as well. So check it out. If you have seen it already, let me know what you think too. And if you're watching the spinoff, And if you're watching the spinoff, the new one that came out, Ballard, let me know what you think about that, because I'm also watching that one now that I'm done with Bosch. So like I said, this is some good stuff to put in between, when you're not watching the games, because football is back. I'm actually going to get ready to go watch the game tonight. So you guys let me know what you think about everything I talked about today. Do you think we're going to see a big rate cut coming next week, or are we going to start off with a quarter rate cut to end the month? You let me know what you think. I'm going to go ahead and finish up the rest of this tea. So until next time, stay tuned, stay curious, and as always, enjoy your first sip.